The needle gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights as Dr. Abigail Porter prepared the final injection. Behind the cold metal bars, Ranger paced, his once proud German Shepherd frame now gaunt and mud-caked. His intelligent eyes never left the syringe. "It's protocol, Frank. The dog was found with an injured child," Sheriff Bennett said, his voice heavy with regret. "Tom, you're making a mistake. That dog was trying to help." Frank Mitchell insisted, leaning on his cane. Margaret Winters stood nearby, arms crossed. "I saw what I saw. That beast had blood on its muzzle, standing over that poor Anderson girl. In the sterile silence, the wall clock ticked mercilessly forward. 3 minutes until scheduled euthanasia. In his kennel." Ranger whimpered softly, memories flashing of the little girl's hand clutching his fur in the darkness underground, of her frightened eyes as water rose around them. Dr. Porter approached the cage, key in hand. Time was running out. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Oak Ridge. Georgia wasn't the kind of town that made the news. Nestled in the foothills with a population just shy of 5,000, it was known mostly for its abandoned quarry and the extensive drainage system built in the 1950s to manage the frequent summer downpours. Old-timers still told stories about the network of tunnels that honeycombed beneath parts of the town, remnants of a brief mining boom long faded into history. For Ranger, none of that mattered 3 months ago. Back then, he'd been Rex, badge number K97 decorated officer with the Dallas Police Department's elite K9 unit. His service record included 12 major drug busts, 3 missing persons found alive, and the Silver Star for K9 valor after tracking an armed suspect through a forest fire. The photos in the precinct hallway showed a proud German Shepherd standing tall beside his handler, Captain Richard Harris, both bearing the confidence that comes from absolute trust. Then came the warehouse collapse. Ranger had detected the structural failure seconds before it happened, barking frantically at Harris to retreat. When his handler hesitated, Ranger had physically forced him back, taking the brunt of falling concrete across his hindquarters. The injury hadn't killed him, but the veterinarian's diagnosis had effectively ended his career partial nerve damage to his right hind leg. Not enough to cripple him, but enough to slow him down, enough to fail the recertification test. What happened next remained a blur in Ranger's memory, a confused sequence of different kennels, different hands, different voices, until eventually, no hands at all. Just the open door of a car and a final command to stay that he'd faithfully obeyed until the vehicle disappeared around the bend. He'd waited 3 days at that rural crossroads before accepting that no one was coming back. Frank Mitchell had lived in Oak Ridge his entire life, except for the years he'd given to the Marines and their K9 program. At 64, his morning routine was unchanging coffee at sunrise, followed by a slow walk through Mapleton Park, his service-injured leg requiring the steady support of his hickory cane. It was on one of these walks that he first noticed the German Shepherd sleeping under the park gazebo, ribs visible, coat dull, but eyes still alert and watchful. On the other side of town, 7-year-old Lily Anderson was fascinated by the storm drains. Her mother, Rebecca, worked double shifts at Oak Ridge Memorial, leaving Lily in the care of neighbors who couldn't always match the girl's boundless energy and curiosity. The recent heavy rains had transformed the usually dry concrete channels into miniature rivers, perfect for sailing the leaf boats that had become Lily's latest obsession. The summer heat pressed down on Oak Ridge like a heavy blanket, the morning air already thick with humidity as Ranger emerged from his makeshift den beneath the maintenance shed in Mapleton Park. 3 months of street life had taught him to move with caution, keeping to shadows and avoiding the animal control truck that patrolled the neighborhoods. His military training remained intact. Wake at dawn, secure the perimeter, assess resources. Today's first priority was water. The park fountain had been shut off for repairs, forcing him to venture closer to the residential streets than he preferred. His right hind leg dragged slightly as he trotted along the tree line, a permanent reminder of the sacrifice that had earned him abandonment. Despite his circumstances, Ranger maintained the dignified bearing of his training, ears alert, eyes constantly scanning for threat or opportunity. The drainage canal that divided the east side of town offered his best hope. Recent rains meant water would be flowing clean and fresh through the concrete channels. Ranger followed the chain-link fence until he found the loose section he'd discovered weeks earlier, squeezing through with practiced ease despite his size. The concrete basin was cool against his paws as he lapped gratefully at a clear puddle collected in a small depression. His reflection showed a shadow of his former self, once glossy coat now matted in places, frame leaner than regulation weight, but eyes still bright with intelligence. He drank methodically, the discipline of his training evident even in this simple act. A rustling sound made his ears prick forward. Someone was coming down the embankment toward the drainage entrance. "I know you're down there, dog." The high, clear voice of a child echoed against the concrete walls. "I saved you some breakfast. Mom says not to feed strays, but you're not really a stray. Are you? You're too smart." Ranger retreated into the shadow of the drainage tunnel, watching cautiously as a small figure appeared at the edge of the embankment. Lily Anderson stood with the fearless confidence of childhood, pigtails bouncing as she scrambled down to the edge of the concrete channel. In her hand was a paper napkin containing what appeared to be half a peanut butter sandwich. "Here, boy," she called, placing the offering on a flat rock near the water's edge. "I've been watching you all week. You don't have to be scared." Ranger remained still, assessing. In his former life, he'd been specifically trained for interaction with children, to remain calm during school demonstrations, to tolerate unpredictable movements and high-pitched voices. This child had been leaving food for 3 days now, always keeping a respectful distance, never trying to grab or chase him. Hunger finally overrode caution. He emerged slowly from the shadows, maintaining eye contact with the girl as he approached the sandwich. His training had included specific protocols for accepting food from strangers, a cautious sniff, a small taste, then waiting to ensure nothing was amiss before consuming the rest. "See, I told Mom you were a police dog or something," Lily said proudly as she watched him eat with careful restraint. "Regular strays gobble everything super fast. You eat like you're at a fancy restaurant." Ranger finished the sandwich, then backed up several paces, maintaining a safe buffer between himself and the child. The girl seemed to understand, sitting down cross-legged on the concrete without trying to approach. "My name's Lily," she announced. "I'm supposed to be at Mrs. Peterson's house, but she falls asleep watching her shows." She pointed to a small pink backpack beside her. "I brought my special leaf boats." "Want to see them race? For 20 minutes." Ranger watched as Lily sent small boats crafted from leaves and twigs sailing down the shallow current. Despite himself, his training instincts engaged, calculating the flow rate, assessing the structural integrity of each vessel, tracking their progress with his eyes as they navigated the miniature rapids. "You're a good audience," Lily informed him solemnly. "Better than my stuffed animals. They never watch where the boats go." The morning's peace was shattered by the distant rumble of thunder. Ranger's head snapped up, ears swiveling toward the sound. His weather sensitivity, honed through years of outdoor search and rescue operations, registered the shift in barometric pressure that humans typically missed. "Oh, it's gonna rain again," Lily complained, gathering her leaf boats. "Mrs. Peterson will worry if I'm not back soon anyway." Ranger watched her climb back up the embankment, relieved that the child was returning to safety. The approaching storm carried the distinctive electrical charge that preceded a significant downpour. His instincts urged him to seek higher ground. By early afternoon, the storm had arrived in full force. Rain lashed sideways across Oak Ridge, overwhelming gutters and flooding low-lying streets. Ranger had taken shelter under the broad awning behind the hardware store, his body pressed against the brick wall for additional protection from the wind. From this vantage point, he could see the rapid transformation of the usually docile drainage channel into a churning, debris-filled torrent. A police cruiser slowly patrolled the street, its wipers working frantically against the downpour. The loudspeaker crackled to life. "Attention Oak Ridge residents, flash flood warning is in effect. Please avoid all drainage areas and low-lying streets. Keep children and pets indoors until further notice." Ranger's ears pricked forward. His training had included flood response scenarios, the recognition of risk zones, identification of victims in moving water, proper approach vectors for water rescues. Even now, the instinct to serve remained embedded in his psyche, impossible to extinguish despite his abandonment. The rain continued for hours, occasionally slackening to a steady patter before renewing its assault with fresh vigor. As late afternoon approached, Ranger's attention was drawn to a commotion several blocks away, raised voices, a door slamming, the sound of someone calling a name repeatedly. "Lily. Lily Anderson." The voice belonged to an elderly woman, distress evident even at this distance. "Has anyone seen Rebecca's girl? She's not in the house." Something cold settled in Ranger's chest, a sensation he'd experienced during operations when situations deteriorated rapidly. He rose from his shelter, ignoring the driving rain as he trotted toward the source of the shouting. His training compelled movement toward potential emergencies, not away from them. Mrs. Peterson stood on her front porch, one hand clutching a raincoat closed at her throat, the other cupped around her mouth as she called into the storm. "Lily, you come back right now, young lady." Ranger paused at the corner, assessing the situation from a distance. The old woman's distress was genuine, her movements displaying the elevated heart rate and respiration of acute anxiety. He performed a quick perimeter check, circling the block to evaluate possible directions a child might have wandered. That's when he caught it, faint but unmistakable, the sound of a child crying, coming from the direction of the drainage canal, following his training. Ranger moved at maximum sustainable speed toward the sound, compensating for his injured leg by adjusting his gait. The drainage canal had transformed into a raging current, its water level risen to within 2 feet of the concrete rim. The chain-link fence that normally secured the perimeter had partially collapsed under the weight of debris, and there, clinging to a metal maintenance ladder halfway down the concrete wall of the canal, was Lily. Her pink backpack was gone, one of her shoes missing, her small body trembling with cold and fear as water surged just below her feet. Each time the current swelled, it licked at her ankles, threatening to pull her into its deadly embrace. "Help!" she screamed, her voice nearly lost in the roar of the water. "Somebody help me!" Ranger's tactical assessment was instantaneous and grim. The water velocity exceeded safe entry parameters. The child's position was precarious but temporarily stable. Direct water rescue would endanger both potential victims. Standard protocol dictated summoning human assistance with proper equipment. He threw back his head and unleashed a howl that cut through the storm, the specific three-toned alert he'd been trained to use for located victims. He repeated it 3 times, then raced along the edge of the canal, searching for any humans who might hear and understand. But the streets remained empty, the storm having driven everyone indoors. Ranger returned to the section of fence closest to Lily, pushing his body through the gap and making his way carefully down the sloped concrete toward the maintenance ladder. "Dog? Good dog," Lily cried when she spotted him, hope flickering across her terrified face. "Please, get help." Ranger whined softly as he reached the ladder, unable to communicate that help wasn't coming. The water level was rising visibly now, each surge bringing it closer to the child's position. Making a decision, he carefully descended the ladder rungs, placing himself on the metal step just below Lily. "What are you doing?" she gasped, as his solid body pressed against her legs, providing additional stability against the current's pull. Ranger had no way to explain the physics of counterbalance, how his 80 pounds of muscle now served as an anchor point for her 30-pound frame. Instead, he remained steady, a living barrier between the child and the hungry water. For nearly 20 minutes they remained locked in this position, the rain continuing to fall in sheets around them. Lily's small hand clutched the scruff of Ranger's neck, her tears falling onto his wet fur. Each time the current surged, Ranger adjusted his position, using his body to shield her from the worst of the pressure. But the water continued to rise, and Ranger's tactical assessment updated accordingly. Their current position would be overrun within minutes. A new approach was necessary. With careful movements, he maneuvered himself up the ladder until he was even with Lily. "Are we going to die?" she whispered, her voice small against the storm's roar. Ranger nudged her upward, using his muzzle to direct her toward the top of the ladder. Hesitantly, the child began to climb, her movements slow with cold and fear. Ranger followed, supporting her from below, his injured leg trembling with the effort, but holding firm. When they reached the top of the concrete channel, Ranger immediately began to assess their options. The main drainage tunnel entrance was nearby, a large concrete pipe that fed into the canal. Under normal circumstances, it would have been dry or carrying minimal water. Now it stood as their only viable shelter from the rising flood, nudging Lily toward the tunnel. Ranger led her inside, far enough to escape the worst of the wind, but not so deep that darkness would terrify the child. The concrete floor sloped upward here, providing precious elevation above the water level in the main canal. "I'm so cold," Lily stammered, her small body shivering violently. Ranger pressed himself against her, sharing what body heat he could, in his prime with proper nutrition. His dense double coat would have provided significant warmth. Now, thin and wet, he could offer only modest comfort. but the child curled gratefully against him nonetheless. Outside. The storm continued its assault, water levels rising inexorably in the drainage system. Ranger's ears remained alert for any sound of search parties or emergency responders, but the roar of water and wind obscured distant noises. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. As darkness began to fall, Ranger made a critical decision. They could not remain in their current position indefinitely. The child's core temperature was dropping dangerously, and the water continued to rise. He would need to leave her temporarily to summon help. With a soft whine, he disengaged himself from Lily, who clutched at his fur in alarm. "Don't leave me," she pleaded, eyes wide with renewed fear. Ranger hesitated, torn between tactical necessity and the child's immediate emotional needs. In that moment of indecision, disaster struck. The current surged suddenly, powerful and debris-laden, sweeping into the mouth of the tunnel with unexpected force. Lily screamed as water swirled around her legs, the current threatening to pull her back toward the main canal. Ranger lunged forward, grabbing her jacket collar carefully in his teeth, employing the precise pressure his training had instilled for human transport without injury. With a strength born of desperate necessity, he pulled her further up the tunnel's incline, away from the surging water. But the effort cost him his footing, and for a terrifying moment, both dog and child tumbled in the shallow water before Ranger regained his balance. In the chaotic scramble, Lily's head struck the concrete wall. She went limp in Ranger's grasp. Frank Mitchell stood at his living room window, watching the storm lash against the glass. His arthritic knee ached with the changing pressure, a barometer more reliable than any weatherman. The emergency alert on his phone had buzzed twice in the past hour, warning of flash floods and instructing residents to stay indoors. He'd already moved his car to higher ground and secured the lawn furniture. Old habits from 30 years of preparing for Gulf Coast hurricanes. "Nothing to do now but wait it out," he muttered to himself. A habit formed during the long years of living alone after Martha's passing. The wail cut through the drumming of the rain, a sound so distinctive that the hairs on Frank's arms stood at attention. 3 long howls, precisely spaced, followed by a pause, then repeated. It wasn't the random barking of a frightened pet or the howl of a spooked stray. This was methodical, intentional. "Son of a gun," Frank whispered, reaching for his raincoat. "That's a search and rescue signal." His years as a Marine K-9 handler had embedded certain knowledge too deeply to be forgotten. That specific howling pattern was standard training for search and rescue dogs, the audible alert when a victim was located but required immediate assistance. He'd heard it countless times during training exercises and twice in real operations. Ignoring the protest of his damaged knee, Frank grabbed his walking stick and a high-powered flashlight before stepping out into the deluge. The howling had stopped, but he oriented himself toward where he'd last heard it, the direction of the drainage canal that ran behind Maple Street. "Margaret," he called, seeing his neighbor struggling with a rain-soaked cardboard box on her porch. "Did you hear that dog howling just now?" Margaret Winters, 78 and razor-sharp despite her years, set down her groceries with visible irritation. "That mangy German shepherd again, I expect. Been skulking around for weeks. Animal control's been useless about picking it up." "No, Margaret, that wasn't random barking. That was a trained alert. Something's wrong." Frank gestured toward the canal. "I'm going to check it out." In this weather, Frank Mitchell, you've got more sense than that, Margaret protested. But Frank was already moving down his driveway, rainwater streaming from his old Marine Corps cap. The closer he got to the drainage canal, the more his instinct screamed that something was seriously amiss. Decades of working with military dogs had taught him to trust those instincts. The canal itself had transformed into a churning river, its normally placid surface now a dangerous torrent carrying branches and debris. A flash of movement caught his eye, a large dark shape moving along the fence line. The German Shepherd emerged from between two sections of the chain link, soaking wet and clearly agitated. Upon seeing Frank, the dog barked sharply and ran a few paces toward the canal before looking back expectantly. "What is it, boy?" Frank called, approaching cautiously. "What did you find?" The dog repeated the behavior, moving toward the canal, then looking back at Frank with unmistakable intention. Classic guide behavior, trained into service dogs to lead humans to something requiring attention. Frank followed, fighting against the wind and his own physical limitations. The dog led him to a section of the fence that had partially collapsed, creating an opening to the steep concrete embankment leading down to the water. "I can't go down there," Frank explained, feeling foolish for talking to the animal as if it could understand. "If someone's in trouble, we need proper help." The dog's response stunned him. A precise bark pattern, followed by pawing at the ground in a circular motion. It was the universal signal for emergency in police canine training. "You're a service dog," Frank breathed, recognition dawning. "You're not just some stray." The shepherd barked once, sharp, affirmative, then began digging frantically at the muddy ground near the edge of the embankment. Frank played his flashlight over the area, noticing something pink and sodden half buried in the mud, a child's backpack. "Oh, God," Frank whispered, fumbling for his phone. His fingers, stiff with age and cold, pressed the emergency dial. "This is Frank Mitchell at the drainage canal behind Maple Street," he told the dispatcher. "I believe there may be a child in danger. There's a service dog trying to alert, and I've found a child's backpack." "Sir, emergency services are stretched thin with the flooding," the dispatcher replied. "Are you certain someone is in danger?" Before Frank could answer, the German Shepherd began barking frantically, racing back and forth along the edge of the embankment. Frank's flashlight beam caught something in the churning water below, a flash of color that didn't belong among the natural debris. "Yes, I'm certain," Frank shouted into the phone. "Get someone here now. Within minutes." Neighbors began emerging from nearby houses despite the storm, drawn by Frank's shouts and the dog's continuous barking. Margaret Winters arrived wrapped in a plastic poncho, followed by the Johnsons from across the street and young couple who'd recently moved into the Henderson place. "What on earth are you doing out in this weather?" Margaret demanded, then froze as Frank pointed his flashlight at the child's backpack. "Is that—" "It's got a name tag," Frank confirmed grimly. "Lily Anderson. Rebecca's girl." Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. "She's supposed to be at Helen Peterson's while Rebecca's on shift at the hospital." The German Shepherd, seemingly frustrated by the human's lack of immediate action, had disappeared back through the fence opening. Frank followed the beam of his flashlight, trying to locate the animal among the shadows and rain. "There he is," called Mr. Johnson, pointing further down the embankment. "What's he doing?" The dog had descended partway down the concrete slope and was digging frantically at what appeared to be a small drainage tunnel entrance, partially submerged by the rising water. His powerful forelegs worked methodically, clearing away debris that had collected around the opening. "He's trying to get into that drainage pipe," Frank realized aloud. "I think the girl might be in there." "That's impossible," Margaret objected. "Those tunnels are too small." "Not for a 7-year-old, Frank countered. "And that dog knows something we don't." The wail of sirens cut through the storm as first responders finally arrived, a police cruiser and fire truck navigating carefully down the flooded street. Sheriff Tom Bennett emerged first, looking grim as he surveyed the scene. "Mitchell, this better not be another false alarm," he called as he approached, rainwater streaming from his hat brim. "Tom, I think the Anderson girl is trapped in the drainage system," Frank explained quickly. "Her backpack was found here, and that service dog is trying to dig into one of the tunnels." Sheriff Bennett's expression shifted from skepticism to concern. "Rebecca's kid. She's supposed to be at Helen's place." "Well, she's not," Frank replied tersely. "And that dog down there seems to know exactly where she is." The firefighters were already unloading equipment, preparing for a potential rescue operation. One of them, a young officer named Collins, paused as he watched the German shepherd's methodical digging. "That's not random," Collins observed. "That dog's had search and rescue training. Look at the pattern. He's clearing an extraction route." Sheriff Bennett keyed his radio. "Dispatch, contact Helen Peterson. Confirm if Lily Anderson is at her residence." And turning to Collins, he added, "How do we proceed here? Standard protocol would be to secure the area and wait for the swift water team." Collins replied, "But with this rain continuing and water levels rising—" He left the implications unspoken. The radio crackled. "Sheriff, Mrs. Peterson confirms Lily was watching TV in the spare room but appears to have slipped out. She's distraught." Bennett's face hardened. "Collins, your call. You've got swift water certification." "We go in now," Collins decided, already strapping on a harness. "That tunnel leads to a maintenance junction about 50 yards in. If the girl found her way there, she might be on higher ground than the main channel." As the rescue team prepared, the German shepherd continued his desperate effort, now barking with renewed urgency as the water level visibly rose around him. Frank watched with growing admiration for the animal's determination and intelligence. "That dog's trying to save her," he told Sheriff Bennett. "He's not just alerting. He's actively working the problem." "Could be," Bennett conceded. "Or it could be a stray that's cornered a frightened child." Margaret Winters, overhearing this exchange, stepped forward with unexpected vehemence. "That dog's dangerous. Tom, I've seen it lurking around for weeks, probably dragged that poor child down there." Frank turned to her in disbelief. "Margaret, that's ridiculous. That's a trained service dog trying to help." "How would you know?" Margaret shot back. "It's a stray. Probably vicious. Why else would it be abandoned?" Before Frank could respond, a commotion erupted at the canal's edge. The German shepherd had succeeded in clearing enough debris to create an opening into the drainage tunnel, and to everyone's shock, was now attempting to enter it himself. "Stop that dog," Margaret cried. "It's going after the girl." Several of the firefighters moved toward the embankment, but Collins held up his hand. "Wait. Watch what he does." The shepherd disappeared into the tunnel, his actions deliberate, rather than predatory. Collins nodded as if confirming something to himself. That's a trained search and rescue entry. He's going to find her. Or finish her off, Margaret muttered darkly. For several tense minutes, the assembled group watched the tunnel entrance. The only sound the continuing drumbeat of rain and the rush of water below. The firefighters completed their preparations, ready to descend into the drainage system, when a new sound cut through the storm, barking from within the tunnel, followed by what might have been a child's voice. "He's found her," Collins exclaimed, signaling his team forward. What happened next unfolded with nightmarish rapidity. The German shepherd emerged from the tunnel, backing out carefully, something clutched gently in his mouth. As he fully emerged into the beam of the flashlights, gasps rippled through the gathered crowd. It was Lily Anderson, limp and unresponsive, her clothing soaked and muddy. The dog held her by the collar of her jacket, using the precise carrying technique taught to service animals for extracting unconscious victims without causing additional injury. "My God," breathed Sheriff Bennett. "He's got her." The shepherd carefully navigated the slippery concrete, compensating for his injured leg as he managed the precious burden. With each step, he glanced back to ensure Lily's head didn't strike the ground, his movements showing the precision of extensive training. As the dog reached a safer section of the embankment, Collins and another firefighter rushed forward to take the child. The moment they had her secure, the shepherd released his gentle grip and backed away, his duty completed. "She's breathing," Collins called out. "Pulse is weak but present." "We need to get her to the hospital immediately." The paramedics swarmed forward with a stretcher, professional efficiency taking over as they stabilized the child. In the confusion, few noticed Margaret Winters approaching the exhausted shepherd, her face contorted with an emotion somewhere between fear and fury. "That dog attacked her," Margaret shouted suddenly, pointing at smears of red visible on the animal's muzzle in the harsh beam of the emergency lights. "Look at the blood on its face. It dragged her down there and mauled her. Indeed, there were traces of red around the shepherd's mouth and on his chest fur." Sheriff Bennett moved closer, his hand shifting to his sidearm. "Everyone back away from the dog," he ordered. "Tom, wait," Frank protested. "That doesn't make sense. Why would it attack her and then bring her out? Maybe it got interrupted by our arrival." Bennett replied, his expression grim. "Margaret's right. Look at the blood." The German shepherd, seeming to sense the shift in atmosphere, backed away from the humans, his tail low but not tucked, the posture of caution rather than guilt. His dark eyes moved from face to face, finally settling on Frank with what seemed like an appeal for understanding. "That's not aggression," Frank insisted. "I worked with military dogs for 15 years. If that dog had attacked her, he'd be showing very different body language now." But Margaret's accusation had taken hold. Several neighbors murmured agreement, pointing to the red stains on the dog's fur. Bennett signaled to his deputy. "Call animal control. We need this dog contained until we know exactly what happened." "The girl hit her head on the concrete wall in there," Collins interjected, looking up from where the paramedics were working. "That's likely where the blood came from. The dog probably got it on him while carrying her out." "Or while attacking her," Margaret countered. "I've been saying for weeks that Stray was dangerous. Now look what's happened." The shepherd, perhaps understanding that his position was rapidly deteriorating, looked once more at Frank, then turned and fled into the storm before anyone could move to capture him. Bennett started to give chase, but stopped at the fence line, prioritizing Lily's evacuation over pursuit of the animal. "We'll find that dog later," he announced. "Right now, let's get this child to the hospital." As the paramedics loaded Lily into the ambulance, Frank stood at the edge of the gathering, a cold certainty settling in his chest. The German shepherd hadn't fled out of guilt. He'd fled because he'd recognized the threat in the human's posture. The same intelligence that had enabled him to rescue Lily had told him that his reward would be capture, and possibly worse. "I'm going to find that dog," Frank told Sheriff Bennett quietly as the ambulance departed. "Before someone makes a terrible mistake. Let animal control handle it." "Frank," Bennett advised, "that dog could be dangerous." "That dog just saved a child's life," Frank replied firmly, "and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." As the crowd dispersed and the emergency vehicles pulled away, Frank Mitchell stood in the rain, staring in the direction the shepherd had disappeared. The downpour was finally beginning to slacken, but a different kind of storm was brewing, one that would pit neighbor against neighbor, fear against reason, and place the fate of a heroic animal in the balance. The storm had finally released its grip on Oak Ridge by midnight, leaving behind a landscape transformed. Streets glistened under streetlights, debris scattered across lawns, and the drainage system continued to channel the runoff toward the river. At Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital, Rebecca Anderson sat beside her daughter's bed, her nurse's uniform still damp from her mad dash through the hospital when she'd heard the news. "She's stable," Dr. Eleanor Matthews had assured her. "Mild concussion, hypothermia, and some minor cuts and bruises. She's a very lucky little girl." Lucky. The word seemed grossly inadequate to Rebecca as she watched her daughter's chest rise and fall beneath the hospital blankets. Lily's face was pale against the stark white pillow, a small bandage covering the laceration on her forehead where she'd struck the concrete tunnel wall. Rebecca had been in the middle of administering medication to a patient when her supervisor had appeared in the doorway, her expression grave. "Rebecca, there's been an incident involving Lily." Those 7 words had unleashed a terror unlike anything she'd experienced before. Now, in the quiet beeping of the hospital room, Rebecca struggled to piece together the fragmented information she'd received. Lily had somehow left Mrs. Peterson's house. She'd fallen into the drainage canal. She'd been found unconscious in a storm drain. A dog was involved somehow. None of it made sense. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Sheriff Bennett stood there, his uniform still bearing the marks of the evening's chaos, his expression somber. "How is she?" he asked quietly. "Sleeping," Rebecca replied. "The doctor says she'll recover fully." She hesitated. "Tom, what happened?" "No one can give me a straight answer about how my daughter ended up in a drainage tunnel during a flash flood." Bennett sighed, removing his hat as he stepped into the room. "We're still putting the pieces together. Helen Peterson thought Lily was watching television in the spare room. She didn't realize Lily had slipped out until we called to check. As for the drainage canal," he shook his head, "we're not sure why she was there, but the storm waters were rising fast. If it hadn't been for—" He stopped abruptly. "If it hadn't been for what—" Rebecca pressed. "There was a dog involved," Bennett said carefully. "A stray German shepherd that's been hanging around town. It appears the dog somehow—" extracted Lily from the drainage tunnel, and brought her out where the rescue team could reach her. Rebecca's brow furrowed. A stray dog rescued my daughter. That's one interpretation, Bennett replied, his tone measured. Margaret Winters and some others believe the dog may have dragged Lily into the drainage system in the first place. The animal had blood on its muzzle when it emerged with Lily. That's ridiculous, came a new voice from the doorway. Frank Mitchell stood leaning on his cane, rainwater still dripping from his coat. Pardon the interruption, but I couldn't help overhearing. That dog saved your daughter's life. Miss Anderson. I'd stake my reputation on it. Bennett's expression tightened. Frank, we've been through this. We don't know what happened down there. I know exactly what happened, Frank countered, stepping into the room. That wasn't just any stray. That was a trained search and rescue dog. Military or police, I'd wager. Everything about its behavior screamed professional training. Rebecca looked between the two men, confusion evident on her exhausted face. I don't understand. If this dog saved Lily, why are we even debating this? Frank's weathered face softened as he addressed Rebecca directly. Because there's a long history of fear trumping reason when it comes to dogs, ma'am, especially large ones. Margaret Winters has been campaigning to have that shepherd removed from the neighborhood for weeks. Now she's convinced it attacked your daughter. Despite all evidence to the contrary, the evidence isn't conclusive either way, Bennett interjected. And we have a duty to ensure public safety. Where is the dog now? Rebecca asked. It ran off after the rescue, Bennett replied. Animal control is searching for it. To do what? Rebecca pressed. Bennett's hesitation told her everything she needed to know. They're going to put it down. Aren't they? Rebecca's voice was hollow. A dog that might have saved my daughter's life. It's standard protocol when an animal is involved in an injury to a child, Bennett explained, his discomfort evident. Especially when the animal has no clear owner and there's any possibility of aggression? Frank snorted. Aggression. That dog carried Lily with the gentle hold taught specifically to K-9 units. It used a textbook rescue technique in impossible conditions. That's not an aggressive animal. That's a hero without a home. Before either could respond, a small voice broke through their discussion. He saved me. Lily's eyes were open, though heavy-lidded with medication. The police dog saved me. Rebecca was instantly at her daughter's side, taking her small hand. Lily, baby, you're awake. How do you feel? Tired, Lily murmured. My head hurts. Her eyes focused on Sheriff Bennett. Are you going to help my friend? Bennett moved closer to the bed, his voice gentling as it always did when speaking to children. Your friend? Lily. The police dog, Lily insisted, her voice stronger. He pulled me out when the water came. He kept me warm. Frank shot Bennett a triumphant look. There's your evidence. Sheriff. Bennett raised a hand, silencing Frank while keeping his focus on Lily. Can you tell us what happened, sweetheart? How did you end up in the drainage tunnel? Lily's brow furrowed with the effort of recollection. I was watching my leaf boats. I do it all the time. But Mrs. Peterson was asleep. Then it started raining really hard. She paused, wincing slightly. I was trying to get my special boat, the one Dad made before he left, but I slipped. The water was so fast. It pulled me in. Rebecca squeezed her eyes shut at the mental image of her daughter being swept away by floodwaters. "Oh, Lily." "I grabbed onto the ladder thing on the wall," Lily continued. "I was screaming, but nobody came. Then the police dog found me. He tried to help me climb up, but I was so cold, and the water kept getting higher." Her small face crumpled. "I was really scared, Mom." "I know, baby," Rebecca soothed, stroking her daughter's hair. "Then what happened?" "The dog showed me how to go into the tunnel where it was drier. He kept pushing me up higher when the water came in." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "Then something hit me, and I don't remember anything else until I woke up here." Sheriff Bennett's posture had changed as Lily spoke, his skepticism visibly fading. "Lily, did the dog ever try to hurt you? Did it bite you or growl at you?" Lily looked horrified at the suggestion. "No, he's my friend. I've been feeding him for weeks. He eats like he's at a fancy restaurant." She tugged at her mother's hand urgently. "Mom, you have to help him. Mrs. Winters doesn't like dogs. She'll hurt him." Frank stepped forward. "Sheriff, I think we've established the facts. That dog deserves a medal, not a death sentence." Bennett rubbed his face, the events of the night clearly weighing on him. "I'll call animal control and update them on the situation. They can still bring the dog in, but for evaluation rather than—" He glanced at Lily and amended his wording. "Rather than other measures, I'm going to find him," Frank stated firmly. "Before someone makes a terrible mistake. Frank, you're in your 60s with a bad leg, and it's the middle of the night." Bennett objected. "Then give me some help," Frank countered. "That dog responded to me earlier. He recognized that I understood his training. I might be able to bring him in safely." After a moment's consideration, Bennett nodded. "I'll assign Officer Collins to assist you. He has K-9 experience." As the men prepared to leave, Lily called out, "His name is Hero. That's what I call him because he looks like a superhero dog." Frank smiled gently at the child. "That's a good name, Lily. We'll find Hero and make sure he's taken care of." Dawn broke over Oak Ridge with the clean, washed quality that often follows severe storms. The drainage canal had receded to normal levels, though evidence of the flood remained in the debris caught along the fence line and the muddy residue coating the concrete slopes. Frank Mitchell and Officer Jake Collins had been searching since 3 a.m., methodically covering the areas where the shepherd had been spotted in recent weeks. Collins, in his early 40s, with the trim build of someone who maintained his military fitness standards, had initially seemed skeptical of Frank's certainty about the dog's training and innocence. But as the older man shared his observations of the shepherd's behavior during the rescue, Collins's professional interest had been piqued. "If you're right about the level of training," Collins remarked as they checked behind the hardware store, "we're not looking for an ordinary stray. We're looking for a service animal that got separated from its handler or unit." "Exactly," Frank agreed, moving more slowly now as his injured leg protested the hours of walking. "And he's injured, favoring his right hind leg. That might be why he was cut loose." Collins frowned. A department wouldn't just abandon a trained K-9 for an injury. "They shouldn't," Frank corrected grimly. "But it happens more often than people realize. Dogs that can't perform at peak level sometimes fall through the cracks of bureaucracy, get labeled as resource allocation issues instead of the veterans they are." They continued their search through the early morning hours, focusing on sheltered areas where a dog might take refuge. The town was beginning to stir around them, residents emerging to assess storm damage and begin cleanup efforts. "Mitchell!" The shout came from across the street, where Margaret Winters stood on her porch in a floral housecoat, arms folded across her chest. "Are you still chasing after that dangerous animal?" Frank suppressed a sigh as he crossed to speak with her. "Margaret, that dangerous animal saved Lily Anderson's life last night. The girl confirmed it herself." Margaret's expression remained unconvinced. "Children get confused in traumatic situations. Everyone saw the blood on that beast." "From the girl's head wound," Collins interjected, joining Frank. "Ma'am, I was there during the rescue. That dog used a trained carry technique to bring the child to safety." "Well, officer," Margaret sniffed, "I suppose you know best. I'm just concerned about neighborhood safety. That animal has been prowling around for weeks, looking half-starved and wild." Frank was about to respond when movement caught his eye. A shadow passing behind the row of hedges bordering Margaret's yard. He gestured subtly to Collins, who nodded in acknowledgement. "Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Winters," Collins said smoothly. "We're handling the situation. You might want to check your back fence line for storm damage. Several properties reported issues." As Margaret turned to inspect her yard, Frank and Collins circled around the block, approaching the hedgerow from the opposite direction. There, partially hidden beneath an azalea bush, lay the German shepherd. His coat was still mud-caked from the previous night's ordeal, and he was clearly exhausted. His eyes watchful, but his posture betraying fatigue. "Easy now," Frank murmured, stopping a respectful distance away. "No one's going to hurt you. Boy." The shepherd's ears pricked forward at the sound of Frank's voice, recognition evident in his alert posture. Collins remained slightly behind, allowing Frank to take the lead. "I need to get closer to check for a microchip or tags," Frank explained quietly to Collins. "Stay back for now. Too many humans might spook him." Slowly, with the deliberate movements of someone familiar with traumatized animals, Frank eased forward. He kept his body language open and non-threatening, speaking in the same calm tone he'd used with military dogs decades earlier. "You did good work last night, soldier," Frank told the shepherd. "Real good work. Lily's safe at the hospital. Thanks to you." At the mention of Lily's name, the dog's posture shifted subtly, a slight tilt of the head, a focused intensity in his gaze. Frank smiled at the reaction. "Yeah, you know who I'm talking about. She's okay. She told us what happened." Frank was now within 6 feet of the shepherd, close enough to see the animal's condition more clearly. Despite the mud, he could make out the sleek lines of a once powerful physique, now diminished by months of inadequate nutrition. The right hind leg was indeed held at a slightly awkward angle, suggesting an old injury improperly healed. "He's definitely had professional training," Frank called softly to Collins. "Watch his eye contact. Consistent and evaluative. He's assessing us as much as we're assessing him." As if to confirm Frank's observation, the shepherd shifted his gaze between the two men, then deliberately lowered his head and relaxed his stance, a signal of non-aggression. "I'm going to try something," Frank said, then issued a crisp command, "Position." The effect was immediate and remarkable. The shepherd immediately sat, his posture straightening despite his evident exhaustion. Frank nodded in satisfaction. Military or police for sure. That's a standard K9 response. Collins whistled softly. That's impressive. Try report. Frank gave the command, and the shepherd stood, moving forward 3 precise steps before sitting again directly in front of Frank, the textbook response of a service dog completing a task and returning to handler position. My God, Frank breathed. This isn't just any police dog. This is an elite-level trained K9. The shepherd maintained his position, eyes fixed on Frank with an intelligence that seemed almost human in its comprehension. Slowly, Frank extended his hand, palm down, allowing the dog to catch his scent. After a moment's consideration, the shepherd leaned forward and gently touched his nose to Frank's fingers. Acceptance. I think we've made a friend, Frank said quietly. Let's see if he'll let me check for identification. With careful movements, he reached toward the dog's neck, feeling for a collar that wasn't there. The shepherd remained still, permitting the examination with the discipline of his training. Frank ran his hands gently along the animal's sides, feeling the prominent ribs beneath the dirty fur, noting the various small cuts and scrapes from the previous night's rescue. He's been on his own for a while, Frank observed, probably at least several months based on his condition. But his core training is still intact. Collins approached slowly, removing a handheld scanner from his belt. Let me check for a microchip. Most service animals are chipped. The shepherd watched Collins's approach with alert caution but didn't retreat. When Collins extended the scanner toward his shoulder, the dog held perfectly still, another indication of professional training. The scanner beeped. Got something? Collins confirmed, reading the display. Chip number registered to... Huh. That's odd. What is it? Frank asked. It's registered to a K9 unit, but not a local one. Dallas Police Department. Collins looked up in surprise. This dog is a long way from home. Frank scratched his chin thoughtfully. Dallas is almost 800 miles from here. How the hell did he end up in Oak Ridge? Let me call this in, Collins said, stepping away to use his radio. The chip should have contact information for the handler or department. While Collins made his call, Frank continued his gentle examination of the shepherd, who seemed to have accepted him as non-threatening. The dog's obvious intelligence and training impressed Frank deeply. He'd worked with military dogs long enough to recognize exceptional quality. Someone invested a lot of time and resources in you, he told the shepherd quietly, then let you go. That doesn't make sense. The dog's dark eyes seemed to reflect understanding, perhaps even agreement. Frank had always found it easy to anthropomorphize canine expressions, but in this case, the depth of comprehension seemed undeniable. Collins returned, his expression thoughtful. I got through to Dallas PD. This dog, his name is apparently Rex, was part of their elite K9 unit. Until about 4 months ago, handler named Richard Harris. What happened 4 months ago? Frank asked, though he suspected the answer. Warehouse collapsed during a drug raid, Collins explained. The dog was injured, saving his handler's life, partial nerve damage to his right hind leg. He gestured to the shepherd's slightly awkward posture. Failed his recertification test because of reduced mobility. Was supposed to be retired to his handler's home. But apparently there were complications. Frank's expression darkened. Let me guess. The handler couldn't keep him, and nobody wanted a partially disabled police dog. Collins nodded grimly. The official record shows he was adopted by a family in Houston, unofficially. My contact says the handler was heartbroken, but department policy and his apartment restrictions prevented him from keeping Rex. The Houston adoption fell through, and Rex was handed off to a transport service to go to a specialized working dog shelter in Tennessee. But he never made it there, Frank concluded. Apparently not. Collins crouched down, looking at the shepherd with newfound respect. Somehow, this dog traveled hundreds of miles, survived on his own for months, and still had the training and instinct to execute a perfect water rescue of a child. Frank placed a gentle hand on the shepherd's head. Not this dog, Rex. His name is Rex. At the sound of his real name, the shepherd's ears pricked forward sharply, and he let out a soft whine, the first vocal response he'd given since they'd found him. He knows his name, Frank observed. After all this time, he still knows who he is. Collins stood, brushing dirt from his uniform pants. I'll arrange transport to the vet clinic. Dr. Porter will want to check him over after last night. Then we can figure out next steps. Frank nodded, then addressed Rex directly. What do you say? Soldier? Ready to come in from the cold? To Collins's evident amazement, Rex stood in response to the question, positioning himself at Frank's left side in perfect heel position despite his injured leg. I'll be damned, Collins murmured. It's like he understands every word. Frank smiled slightly as he began walking slowly, mindful of both his own limitations and the dog's injury. Rex matched his pace perfectly, maintaining the precise distance of a trained service animal. Of course he understands, Frank replied. He's still on duty. He never stopped being who he was trained to be, even when everyone else forgot. As they made their way through the neighborhood toward Collins' patrol car, residents emerged from their homes to watch the procession. The elderly former Marine, the police officer, and the mud-covered German shepherd, walking with unmistakable dignity despite his bedraggled appearance. Among the onlookers was Margaret Winters, her expression shifting from suspicion to uncertainty as she observed Rex's disciplined behavior beside Frank. The scene before her clearly contradicted her firmly held beliefs about the dangerous stray. "That's the dog from last night," she called as they approached. "The one that was with Lily." "Yes, Margaret," Frank replied patiently. "This is Rex. He's a retired police K-9 from Dallas who saved Lily's life." Margaret studied the shepherd with narrowed eyes, taking in his obedient heel position and calm demeanor. "Well," she said finally, "he doesn't look quite so wild now." "He never was wild, Margaret," Frank corrected gently. "He was just lost. There's a big difference." As they continued toward the waiting patrol car, Frank felt a profound sense of rightness in the moment. The shepherd's steady presence beside him awakened memories of his years with the Marine K-9 unit. The unspoken bond of trust between handler and dog, the simple clarity of purpose that came from serving alongside such straightforward, loyal beings. "We'll get you sorted out, Rex," Frank promised quietly. "Whatever happens next, you're not on your own anymore." Rex glanced up at him briefly, then returned his gaze forward, maintaining his perfect heel position. To most observers, it would have seemed like nothing more than trained behavior. But Frank recognized something deeper in the shepherd's bearing, the subtle straightening of his posture. the slight relaxation around his eyes. It was the look of a soldier who, after a long and difficult mission, had finally found his way home. The examination room at Oak Ridge Veterinary Clinic smelled of antiseptic and wet dog. Dr. Abigail Porter moved with methodical precision as she assessed Rex's condition, her experienced hands gentle but thorough as they explored the German Shepherd's frame. Frank Mitchell sat nearby, his weathered hands resting on his cane, watching the process with keen interest. Officer Collins stood by the door, occasionally answering calls on his radio as the town continued its storm cleanup efforts. "Well," Dr. Porter said finally, stepping back and removing her stethoscope, "considering what he's been through, he's in remarkably good shape." She made notes on a clipboard before continuing. "He's approximately 15 pounds underweight. Several minor lacerations and abrasions from last night's rescue effort. Evidence of previous injuries that healed without proper medical attention." She indicated Rex's right hind leg. "The nerve damage here is significant but not debilitating. With proper nutrition and physical therapy, he could regain considerable function." "What about his overall health?" Frank asked, concern evident in his voice. "He's been living rough for months." Dr. Porter nodded. "Surprisingly good, actually. No heartworm, which is miraculous given his circumstances. Some flea infestation, easily treated. Mild anemia, consistent with malnutrition." She smiled slightly. "He's either incredibly lucky or incredibly resourceful. Probably both." Throughout the examination, Rex had remained perfectly still, tolerating the veterinarian's probing with stoic dignity. Only his eyes moved, tracking each person in the room with alert intelligence. "His training is extraordinary," Dr. Porter observed, watching Rex maintain his seated position without restraint or command. "Most dogs would be anxious in this environment after what he's been through." "Dallas PD confirmed he was one of their top canine officers," Collins remarked. "Multiple commendations for field performance. His handler is being notified about the situation." Frank shifted in his chair. "And what exactly is the situation? Officer, is Rex still considered dangerous? Is animal control going to push for euthanasia?" Collins shook his head. "Not after Lily's statement and confirmation of his identity. Right now, he's classified as a found service animal. Dallas PD technically still owns him, but since he was officially retired from service, his status is complicated. He should be returned to his handler," Frank stated firmly. "It's not that simple," Collins replied. "The handler's living situation hasn't changed. Department policy is clear about retired canines with medical issues. They're trying to locate the transport company that was supposed to take him to the specialized shelter." Frank's expression hardened. "So they can lose him again?" "That dog saved a child's life using the training they gave him, and they want to shuffle him back into the system that failed him." Before Collins could respond, a commotion in the clinic's reception area drew their attention. Moments later, the door burst open, and Rebecca Anderson rushed in, still wearing her hospital scrubs, her expression a mix of determination and emotion. "Is this him?" she demanded, her eyes finding Rex immediately. "Is this the dog that saved my daughter, Dr. Porter stepped forward. "Miss Anderson, yes. This is Rex. He's undergoing evaluation right now." Rebecca moved closer, studying the shepherd with intense focus. Rex returned her gaze steadily, his posture alert but non-threatening. After a moment, Rebecca knelt to his level. maintaining eye contact. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice thick with emotion. "Lily wouldn't be alive without you." To everyone's surprise, Rex responded by slowly lowering his head in what almost appeared to be acknowledgement. The gesture was so human-like in its understanding that the room fell silent. Rebecca turned to Frank and Collins. "Lily's asking about him constantly. She's worried sick that something bad will happen to her hero dog." "We're sorting things out," Collins assured her. "His identity has been confirmed through his microchip. He's a retired police canine from Dallas." Rebecca's eyebrows rose. "Dallas? How did he end up here?" "That's what we're trying to determine," Collins replied. "There seems to have been a miscommunication during his retirement process." Frank snorted. "That's a polite way of saying they lost track of a decorated officer because he got injured doing his job." Rebecca's expression shifted to one of indignation. "So what happens to him now?" "Lily says he's been living on the streets for weeks, maybe months. Maybe his former department has been notified," Collins explained. "They're considering the options." "I know what that means," Rebecca said sharply. "Bureaucracy and paperwork while he sits in a kennel." She shook her head firmly. "No, absolutely not. That dog saved my child's life. He's coming home with us as soon as he's medically cleared." The declaration hung in the air for a moment before Dr. Porter cleared her throat. "Ms. Anderson, while I appreciate the sentiment, there are protocols for handling service animals, especially ones with specialized training." "I don't care about protocols," Rebecca interrupted. "I care about doing what's right. Rex deserves a home, not more uncertainty." Frank watched this exchange with quiet approval. Noting how Rex's attention had fixed on Rebecca, his intelligent eyes assessing her with what appeared to be hope. "There might be legal complications," Collins cautioned. "Technically, he still belongs to people who lost track of him and left him to fend for himself," Rebecca challenged. "I'm a single mother who works 12-hour shifts as an ER nurse. I know something about responsibility and follow-through. If they couldn't be bothered to make sure he reached a safe destination, they forfeited any claim to him." The passion in her voice seemed to affect everyone in the room, but none more visibly than Rex himself. The shepherd had shifted his position slightly, moving closer to Rebecca while maintaining his disciplined posture. Dr. Porter observed this with professional interest. "He seems to have formed an immediate connection with you. Ms. Anderson, that's unusual for a dog with his training background, especially after trauma." "He saved Lily," Rebecca said simply. "I think he knows we're connected through her." Frank nodded slowly. "Service dogs like Rex are trained to form strong bonds with those they protect. If he recognizes you as Lily's mother, then it's settled," Rebecca declared. "Dr. Porter, what needs to happen before he can be released?" The veterinarian looked to Collins, who sighed and held up his hands. "I need to consult with the sheriff and contact Dallas PD again, but, given the circumstances, I think we can arrange a temporary foster situation while the details are sorted out." Rebecca's expression made it clear she considered the matter far more permanent than temporary, but she nodded in agreement. "Thank you, officer. How long will that take?" "I can make the calls now," Collins replied, stepping into the hallway with his phone, left alone with Frank and Dr. Porter. Rebecca knelt beside Rex again. Would you like to come home with us? Rex Lilly has been talking about you non-stop. The shepherd's tail moved in a small, tentative wag, the first display of ordinary canine behavior they had seen from him. Frank chuckled. I think that's a yes, Doctor. Porter began preparing discharge instructions, listing medications and care requirements for Rex's recovery. He'll need a specialized diet to help him regain weight safely. The leg will require physical therapy. I can show you some exercises that will help strengthen the damaged muscles. And, of course, he'll need follow-up appointments to monitor his progress. Rebecca nodded, absorbing the information with the nurse's practiced attention to medical details. When can he come home? I'd like to keep him overnight for observation and to start IV fluids. Dr. Porter replied. If all goes well, he could be released tomorrow afternoon. Collins returned, his expression thoughtful. Sheriff Bennett has approved temporary placement with the Anderson family, with certain conditions. He handed Rebecca a form. You'll need to sign this acknowledging that Rex is still legally considered property of Dallas PD pending their final decision, and that you accept responsibility for his care and supervision. Rebecca scanned the document quickly, then signed without hesitation. And Dallas, what did they say? They're surprised. Collins admitted. Apparently, they'd been told Rex was successfully placed with a family in Houston. The transport company claimed delivery was completed. There's going to be an internal investigation about how he ended up hundreds of miles away in Georgia. Frank's expression darkened. Someone dumped him. Plain and simple. Probably took the transport fee and left him on some back road. We don't know that for certain, Collins cautioned, though his tone suggested he shared Frank's suspicion. His handler is a Captain Richard Harris. Collins continued. He's been notified about Rex's recovery. Apparently he tried to adopt Rex himself after the injury but couldn't due to housing restrictions and department policy. Is he coming to get him? Rebecca asked, a protective note entering her voice. That's unclear at the moment, Collins replied. He's currently on assignment and can't leave immediately. He asked to be kept informed of Rex's condition and placement. As the adults discussed logistics, Rex remained perfectly still, his gaze moving between them as if following the conversation. Only the occasional flick of his ears betrayed his active attention to each voice. Frank noticed this and smiled slightly. He understands more than most people realize. Police dogs like him are trained to process complex situations and human interactions. All the more reason he deserves better than being treated like lost property, Rebecca said firmly. Dr. Porter finished her paperwork and approached Rex with a gentle smile. Let's get you settled for the night. Officer, you've earned some proper rest. To everyone's surprise, Rex looked to Frank first, as if seeking permission or guidance. The old Marine nodded slightly. Go on, soldier. You're in good hands. With that silent approval, Rex stood and followed Dr. Porter willingly toward the kennel area. His disciplined demeanor never wavered, though his injured leg betrayed a slight limp after the long, stressful day. As the door closed behind them, Rebecca turned to Frank with evident curiosity. He seems to trust you implicitly. Have you had much experience with police dogs? Marine Canine Unit, back in my younger days? Frank explained. Worked with some of the finest dogs the military ever trained. Rex recognized that experience somehow. responded to me using standard commands from the beginning. Would you... Rebecca hesitated. Would you be willing to help us when Rex comes home with us? I mean, I don't know the first thing about handling a dog with his background. Frank's weathered face broke into a genuine smile. Ms. Anderson, it would be my honor. Their conversation was interrupted by Sheriff Bennett's arrival. He entered with the cautious expression of a man prepared for conflict, nodding to Collins before addressing Frank and Rebecca. I've just come from a town council emergency meeting, he announced without preamble. Margaret Winters has filed a formal complaint demanding the German Shepherd be removed from Oak Ridge as a public safety risk. Rebecca's face flushed with anger. That's absurd. Rex saved my daughter's life. I know that, Bennett replied, raising a placating hand. And I presented Lily's statement to the council, but Margaret has gathered signatures from 12 residents who claim to have felt threatened by the dog over the past month. Of course they felt threatened, Frank interjected. He's a German Shepherd living on the streets. His mere existence made people uncomfortable, even though he never actually harmed anyone. Bennett nodded wearily. I understand that, Frank, but I have to follow proper procedures here. There's going to be a public hearing tomorrow afternoon to determine if the dog poses a threat to community safety. His name is Rex, Rebecca corrected firmly. And this is ridiculous. He's a decorated police officer who saved a child from drowning. I agree with you, Bennett said, surprising them both. But Margaret has influence with the council, and she's convinced several members that the incident with Lily might not have happened as reported. She's suggesting the dog lured Lily to the drainage canal. That's insane, Rebecca exclaimed. Lily told us exactly what happened. Children can be confused after trauma, Bennett quoted, his expression making it clear these weren't his words. Margaret is pushing hard on this, and the council wants to err on the side of caution. Frank stood up straighter, his hand tightening on his cane. So what happens at this hearing? Evidence will be presented from both sides. The council will vote on whether Rex should be classified as dangerous, which would legally prevent him from remaining within town limits. Bennett hesitated. If that classification is applied, standard protocol would typically call for euthanasia, Frank finished grimly. After everything he's done, they'd still put him down. I won't let that happen, Rebecca declared, her voice steady with determination. I'll fight this with everything I have. Bennett nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. The hearing is set for 2 p.m. tomorrow at the town hall. I suggest you both prepare your statements. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think Rex is exactly what you all say he is. A hero who deserves better than he's gotten. But my personal opinion doesn't change my duty to follow procedure. As Bennett departed, Rebecca and Frank exchanged resolute looks. The battle for Rex's future was just beginning, and the stakes couldn't be higher. I need to get back to Lily, Rebecca said. She should know what's happening. Frank nodded. I'll stay here a while longer. Rex shouldn't be alone tonight, even in a clinic. Not with what's coming tomorrow. As Rebecca left, Frank settled back into his chair, prepared for a long vigil. Through the observation window, he could see Rex lying in a clean kennel, his posture alert despite his exhaustion, his dark eyes fixed on the door as if standing guard even now. Rest easy, soldier, Frank murmured. Tomorrow, we fight for you. The kennel area of Oak Ridge Veterinary Clinic was quiet, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional whimper from one of the other animal patients. Rex lay on a clean blanket, his body still but his mind alert, cataloging every sound and movement with the precision his training had instilled. Through the observation window, he could see Frank Mitchell dozing in a chair, the old Marine's presence providing a strange comfort Rex hadn't felt in months. Dr. Porter moved quietly among the kennels, checking on her patients before closing for the night. When she reached Rex's enclosure, she paused, studying him with professional interest. "You're not like any stray I've ever treated," she murmured, kneeling to his level. "I almost euthanized you yesterday. Do you understand how close it was?" Rex's dark eyes met hers, unblinking and somehow knowing. Dr. Porter felt a chill run down her spine, not of fear but of recognition, there was something profoundly human in that gaze, an intelligence that transcended ordinary animal awareness. "The hearing tomorrow will determine everything," she continued, speaking as if to a colleague rather than a patient. "Margaret Winters has considerable influence in Oak Ridge. She's been on the town council for 30 years and rarely loses a vote she cares about." Rex's ears twitched forward, tracking her words with evident comprehension. Dr. Porter sighed, standing to make a final notation on his chart. "I'll do everything I can medically to help your case. Your recovery is remarkable given your circumstances. But small towns have long memories and deep prejudices. People like Margaret see a German shepherd and think dangerous, regardless of evidence to the contrary." As if in response, Rex lowered his head to his paws, the picture of dignified resignation. The gesture was so human that Dr. Porter paused in her writing, struck by its eloquence. "Get some rest, officer," she said finally. "Tomorrow will be challenging for everyone." Morning brought a flurry of activity to the clinic as news of the impending hearing spread throughout Oak Ridge. Frank awoke to find Rebecca Anderson already present. Lily in a wheelchair beside her, the girl's face lit up when she spotted Frank through the observation window. "Mr. Mitchell is Hero. I mean Rex. Okay. Can I see him?" Lily called, her voice muffled by the glass. Frank smiled, wincing slightly as he straightened his stiff back. Sleeping in a clinic chair hadn't done his old injuries any favors. "Good morning. Lily, I'm sure Dr. Porter will let you visit him soon." Dr. Porter emerged from the back office, surprise evident on her face at finding her waiting room already occupied. "You're all here early?" "We couldn't sleep," Rebecca explained. "The hearing is in 5 hours, and we wanted to check on Rex." Dr. Porter nodded, understanding. "He had a restful night. I've given him antibiotics for the minor infections from his cuts, and started him on a nutrient-rich diet to address the malnutrition. His vitals are stable and strong." She turned to Lily with a gentle smile. "Would you like to see him?" "Yes, please," Lily exclaimed, attempting to push herself up from the wheelchair before her mother gently restrained her. "Easy, sweetheart. You're still recovering too," Rebecca cautioned. Dr. Porter led them to the treatment room, where Rex had been moved for his morning examination. The German shepherd sat perfectly still on the examination table, his posture military straight despite his evident physical discomfort. When Lily entered, his entire demeanor transformed. His ears perked forward, his eyes brightened, and his tail gave a small, controlled wag. "Rex, Lily cried, her face radiant with joy. "You remember me?" Frank watched as the shepherd's disciplined exterior softened visibly in the child's presence. It was subtle, nothing so undignified as bouncing or excessive tail-wagging, but the change was unmistakable to anyone familiar with working dogs. Rex was genuinely happy to see the girl. "Can I pet him?" Lily asked, looking between her mother and the veterinarian. "Carefully," Dr. Porter advised. "He has some sore spots from his rescue efforts." Lily wheeled closer, reaching out a small hand. Rex lowered his head slightly, making it easier for her to reach him. With gentle fingers, she stroked his ears and the top of his head. "Thank you for saving me," she said solemnly. "You're the bravest dog ever." Rex responded by carefully, deliberately pressing his muzzle against her outstretched palm, the closest thing to a verbal "you're welcome" a dog could offer. Frank cleared his throat, unexpectedly moved by the exchange. "Lily, did you know Rex is a police officer? He worked for the Dallas Police Department and earned medals for bravery." Lily's eyes widened. "Really, I knew he was special. I told Mom he was too smart to be a regular dog." Rebecca smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm, though worry lines remained etched around her eyes. "Frank, have you heard anything more about the hearing Sheriff Bennett said Margaret has 12 signatures on her petition?" "I spoke with Collins this morning," Frank replied. "Margaret's been busy. She's up to 20 signatures now. She's convinced half the east side of town that Rex is a menacing predator who's been terrorizing the neighborhood for months." "That's ridiculous," Rebecca fumed. "He's never hurt anyone." "Fear is a powerful motivator," Dr. D. Porter observed, completing her examination of Rex's injured leg. "And Margaret Winters has been afraid of large dogs since she was bitten as a child. It's not rational, but it's very real to her." "What about our side?" Rebecca asked. "Who's supporting Rex? Sheriff Bennett is officially neutral, but he's ensuring Lily's statement is entered into evidence." Frank explained. "Collins is testifying about Rex's behavior during the rescue. Dr. Porter will present her medical assessment." He hesitated. "And I've called in a few favors from my Marine days. Got some expert testimony on service dog training and behavior." Rebecca nodded, her nurse's mind automatically organizing information. "What are our chances?" Frank's weathered face betrayed his concern. "Honestly, it could go either way. Small-town politics are unpredictable, and Margaret has deep roots here." "I made this for Rex," Lily interrupted, pulling a folded paper from her pocket. She carefully opened it to reveal a childish drawing of a German shepherd wearing what appeared to be a cape. "It's Hero Rex, saving me from the flood." She held it up for Rex to see. The shepherd studied the drawing with such evident interest that Dr. Porter chuckled. "I swear he understands exactly what that is." "Of course he does," Lily replied with the certainty only children possess. "He's the smartest dog ever." Their moment of connection was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Bennett, his expression grave as he entered the treatment room. "Morning, folks," he greeted them, his eyes lingering on Rex with something like regret. "I'm afraid there's been a development. The hearing has been moved up to 11 a.m. on Margaret's request. She's claiming that delaying creates a public safety risk." Rebecca checked her watch in alarm. "That's less than 2 hours from now." "I know, and I'm sorry," Bennett replied. I tried to maintain the original schedule, but I was overruled. Mayor Wilson tends to side with Margaret on public safety issues. This is deliberate, Frank growled. She's trying to rush the process before we can organize proper support. Bennett didn't deny it. I suggest you all head to town hall now. Margaret's already there with her supporters, setting up her presentation. Rebecca turned to Dr. Porter, panic flickering across her face. Is Rex well enough to attend? The council needs to see him, to understand what he's really like. Dr. Porter hesitated, her professional caution at war with her sense of justice. Medically speaking, he should be resting, but under these circumstances. She sighed. Yes, he can attend, but he'll need to be monitored for signs of stress or pain. I'll watch him, Frank promised. I know the signs. As the group prepared to leave, Frank knelt beside Rex, speaking softly so only the shepherd could hear. This is it, soldier. One last mission, maybe the most important one. We need you to be exactly who you are, a hero with a warrior's heart. Rex's dark eyes met Frank's, steady and somehow knowing. In that moment of connection, Frank felt a certainty that transcended rational explanation. Whatever happened at the hearing, this extraordinary dog understood exactly what was at stake. Let's go, Frank said, rising stiffly to his feet. Time to face the town. Oak Ridge Town Hall dated back to 1892, its red brick facade and white columns a testament to the community's historical pride. Today, the building hummed with unusual activity as residents filed into the main chamber. Drawn by the morning's hastily circulated news, a special hearing to determine the fate of the German shepherd that had rescued little Lily Anderson during the flood. The chamber's oak benches were already filling when Frank Mitchell arrived with Rex walking perfectly at heel beside him, the shepherd's demeanor calm and dignified despite the unfamiliar surroundings. Rebecca followed, pushing Lily's wheelchair, the girl clutching her drawing of Hero Rex with determined fingers. Dr. Porter completed their small procession, carrying a folder of medical documentation. Heads turned as they entered, conversations pausing as eyes fixed on Rex. The shepherd neither cowered nor reacted to the attention, maintaining his disciplined position beside Frank with military precision. His appearance had been transformed by Dr. Porter's care, his coat brushed to a soft gleam, his wounds cleaned and bandaged, though his frame still showed the effects of months of inadequate nutrition. "Would you look at that?" murmured an elderly man near the door. "That don't look like no vicious animal to me. Appearances can be deceiving." "Harold," replied his companion. "Margaret says it's been stalking the east side for months. Nearly took a child's life." Frank overheard this exchange with a grim set to his jaw, but kept moving forward. They had been assigned seats in the front row, directly facing the raised dais where the town council would sit. Across the aisle, Margaret Winters held court among her supporters, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her expression one of righteous determination. "The beast shouldn't even be in this building," Margaret declared loudly enough to carry. "It's a public safety hazard." Rebecca tensed, but Frank placed a restraining hand on her arm. "Save it for the testimony," he advised quietly. "Don't give them ammunition." Mayor Wilson, a portly man with thinning hair and perpetually harried expression, entered from a side door followed by the 4 other council members. The room quieted as he took his seat at the center of the dais. arranging his papers with deliberate movements that suggested discomfort with the proceedings. "This special session of the Oak Ridge Town Council is called to order," he announced, tapping a small wooden gavel. "We are convened to determine whether the animal in question," he consulted his notes, "a German Shepherd, currently going by the name of Rex, constitutes a danger to public safety under Municipal Code Section 14.3 regarding dangerous animals within town limits." Sheriff Bennett stood near the side wall, his expression carefully neutral. Officer Collins was positioned near the main entrance, occasionally scanning the growing crowd with professional assessment. "The procedure will be as follows," Mayor Wilson continued. "Mrs. Winters has filed the complaint and will present her evidence first. Then those speaking in defense of the animal will have equal time. The council will ask questions as needed, after which we will deliberate and vote." He peered over his reading glasses. "I remind everyone that this is a civil proceeding, not a court of law, but we expect civil behavior nonetheless." Margaret Winters rose smoothly, clutching a folder of her own. At 78, she carried herself with the confident authority of someone accustomed to being heard and heeded. Her pale blue pantsuit and pearl necklace presented an image of respectable concern as she approached the podium. "Council members, neighbors, friends," she began, her voice clear and carrying. "I come before you today not out of malice, but out of deep concern for the safety of our community, particularly our children." She paused, allowing her gaze to sweep the room. "For nearly 2 months, a large, unrestrained German Shepherd has been roaming our neighborhoods, scavenging from garbage cans, frightening pedestrians, and creating an atmosphere of menace." Frank felt Rex shift slightly beside him, the shepherd's dark eyes fixed on Margaret with what almost seemed like comprehension. He placed a reassuring hand on the dog's shoulder, feeling the steady, controlled breathing beneath his palm. 27 residents have signed a petition confirming sightings of this animal behaving in a threatening manner," Margaret continued, brandishing a document. "Mrs. Peterson reports it growling at her from behind the hardware store. The Johnsons found their garbage strewn across their yard 3 times. And most seriously," here she lowered her voice dramatically, "2 days ago, this animal was discovered with 7-year-old Lily Anderson in a drainage tunnel during the flood. The child unconscious and bleeding." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Lily squirmed in her wheelchair, her face flushing with indignation. "The facts are clear," Margaret pressed on. "This is a large, powerful animal with no owner, no training, and no place in our community. While some have romanticized its actions during the flood, I submit that the animal likely dragged the child into danger in the first place. The blood found on its muzzle tells the real story." Rebecca's knuckles whitened as she gripped the handles of Lily's wheelchair. Frank maintained his outward calm, though his jaw tightened visibly. "The municipal code is unambiguous," Margaret concluded. "Any animal determined to be a danger to residents must be removed from town limits or humanely euthanized. Given this animal's size, strength, and demonstrated aggression, I believe euthanasia is the only responsible choice." She returned to her seat amid supportive murmurs from her section of the audience. Mayor Wilson adjusted his glasses. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters. We'll now hear from those speaking in defense of the animal." Rebecca rose first, moving to the podium with the controlled grace of someone accustomed to medical emergencies. Her scrubs had been exchanged for a simple blouse and slacks, but she carried the same quiet authority she displayed in the ER. "My name is Rebecca Anderson. I'm a registered nurse at Oak Ridge Memorial and the mother of Lily Anderson." Her voice was steady, professional. "2 days ago, my daughter slipped away from her caretaker during the storm and fell into the drainage canal. The dog you're considering killing today saved her life at great risk to his own." She turned slightly, indicating Rex, who sat perfectly still beside Frank. "This is not some vicious stray. This is Rex, badge number K97, formerly of the Dallas Police Department's elite K9 unit, a decorated officer with multiple commendations who was separated from his handler due to an injury sustained in the line of duty." Surprised murmurs swept through the room. Even Margaret looked momentarily disconcerted by this information. "Dr. Porter has confirmed Rex's identity through his microchip," Rebecca continued. "His service record includes numerous successful operations, including several involving the rescue of children. His actions during the flood weren't random chance. They were the result of years of professional training and an innate drive to protect." She paused, allowing her gaze to sweep across the council members. "My daughter is alive because Rex found her, kept her warm, and brought her to safety when the water rose. The blood Mrs. Winters mentioned came from Lily's head wound, sustained when she hit the concrete wall during the flood. Rex carried her through the rising water, using a specialized technique taught to police dogs for extracting victims without causing further injury." Rebecca's voice caught slightly. "He didn't drag my daughter into danger. He saved her from it, and now he deserves our protection in return." As Rebecca returned to her seat, Dr. Porter approached the podium next, presenting Rex's medical evaluation in clinical terms that emphasized his training responses, non-aggressive behavior during examination, and the evidence of his efforts to save Lily. Officer Collins followed, describing Rex's textbook rescue techniques and responding to technical questions about K9 training protocols. Then it was Frank's turn. The old Marine walked slowly to the podium, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the wooden floor. He stood straight, despite his evident discomfort, the habits of military bearing overriding physical limitations. "My name is Franklin Mitchell. I served 26 years in the United States Marine Corps, 15 of those years with the K9 Special Operations Unit." His gravelly voice commanded attention without effort. "I've trained, handled, and evaluated military working dogs in combat zones across 3 continents. I know dangerous dogs. I know aggressive dogs." He paused, turning to look directly at Rex. "And I know heroes when I see them." The room had fallen completely silent, every eye fixed on the weathered veteran. "What you have before you is not a threat to this community. What you have is a decorated officer who, despite being abandoned, injured, and left to fend for himself, still upheld his oath to protect and serve." Frank's voice roughened with emotion. "He didn't just save Lily Anderson. He did it exactly by the book, using the specialized techniques that only the top 1% of service dogs ever master." Frank turned back to the council, his expression hardening. "Voting to destroy this dog wouldn't be just a mistake. It would be a desecration of everything he represents: loyalty, courage, and service beyond self. This town should be giving him a medal, not a death sentence." As Frank returned to his seat, Mayor Wilson cleared his throat. "Thank you for those perspectives. Before we continue with questions, is there anyone else who wishes to speak?" A small voice piped up from the front row. "I want to talk." All eyes turned to Lily Anderson, her small face determined as she clutched the armrests of her wheelchair. "Sweetie, you don't have to," Rebecca whispered, but Lily shook her head firmly. "I need to tell them what really happened," she insisted. Mayor Wilson hesitated, then nodded. "We'll hear from Lily Anderson. Officer Collins, could you bring the microphone to her since she can't easily approach the podium?" Collins complied, kneeling beside Lily's wheelchair to hold the microphone at her level. The chamber fell silent as the little girl took a deep breath. "Rex didn't hurt me," she began, her voice small but clear. "I was watching my leaf boats in the canal when it started raining really hard. I tried to get my special boat, the one my dad made before he left us, and I slipped and fell in. The water was so fast and scary." Lily's voice trembled slightly, but she continued with determination. "I was screaming and holding on to the ladder thing on the wall, but nobody heard me because of the storm. Then Rex came. He showed me how to climb up higher, and when the water kept rising, he led me into the tunnel where it was safer." She looked directly at Margaret Winters, her child's honesty piercing. "He kept me warm when I was so cold, and when something hit my head and everything went dark, he must have carried me out to find help." Her chin lifted. "Rex is my hero. He's not dangerous. He's the bravest, smartest dog ever, and he's my friend." The simple testimony hung in the air, its unvarnished truth creating a moment of perfect clarity in the proceedings. Even Margaret's supporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the narrative of a dangerous predator difficult to maintain in the face of a child's grateful accounting. Mayor Wilson cleared his throat, visibly moved. "Thank you. Lily, your testimony is very valuable to these proceedings." As Collins returned the microphone to its stand, the chamber doors at the back of the room suddenly opened. A tall man in a Dallas Police Department uniform entered, his presence commanding immediate attention. Despite evident travel fatigue, he carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of authority. "I apologize for interrupting," he announced, his voice carrying easily through the room. "My name is Captain Richard Harris, Dallas Police Department K-9 Unit. I believe you're discussing my partner." The Oak Ridge Town Hall fell silent as Captain Richard Harris made his way down the central aisle. His uniform was slightly rumpled from travel, but the authority in his stride commanded respect. Rex, who had maintained perfect composure throughout the proceedings, suddenly stiffened, his ears sharply forward, his entire body alert with recognition. Mayor Wilson recovered first from the unexpected interruption. "Captain Harris, we weren't aware you were coming. Officer Collins informed us you were unable to leave Dallas. I caught the first flight available and drove the rest of the way," Harris replied, his eyes never leaving Rex. "Some things are more important than protocol." As Harris approached the front of the chamber, Rex's disciplined demeanor faltered for the first time. A small whine escaped him, and his tail gave a single, controlled wag. The shepherd remained seated beside Frank, but every line of his body strained toward his former handler. Harris knelt before Rex, his professional composure cracking to reveal raw emotion. "Hey, partner," he said softly, extending his hand. "It's been a while." The reunion that followed brought tears to many eyes in the chamber. Rex pressed his muzzle into Harris's palm, then leaned forward until his head rested against his former handler's chest. Harris wrapped his arms around the shepherd's neck, his fingers gently exploring the still prominent ribs, the healing cuts, the evidence of months of hardship. "I'm so sorry, buddy," he whispered, his voice thick. "I never stopped looking for you." Mayor Wilson cleared his throat, clearly moved but mindful of procedure. "Captain Harris, we welcome your input in these proceedings. Would you like to make a formal statement regarding this animal?" Harris stood, composing himself with visible effort. Rex returned to his seated position, but remained pressed against his former handler's leg, unwilling to surrender the connection now restored. "Mr. Mayor, council members, citizens of Oak Ridge," Harris began, approaching the podium, "the dog you're discussing is Rex, officially designated Canine 7 in the Dallas Police Department. For 5 years, he was my partner, my protector, and the finest working dog I've ever had the privilege to handle." Harris's voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Rex has saved numerous lives during his service, including my own. 4 months ago, during a warehouse raid, Rex detected a structural failure seconds before it occurred. He physically forced me back from a collapsing wall, taking the impact himself. His actions that day saved not only me but 3 other officers." Margaret Winters shifted uncomfortably in her seat as Harris continued. "The injury Rex sustained affected the mobility in his right hind leg. Department policy required his retirement, as he could no longer perform the physically demanding aspects of canine duty. As his handler, I attempted to adopt him, but my apartment building had size restrictions on pets, and exceptions couldn't be made even for retired service animals." Harris's jaw tightened with barely controlled anger. "Rex was supposedly transferred to a specialized adoption service for retired working dogs. I was assured he would be placed with a suitable family who understood his background and needs. I received confirmation that he had been successfully placed in Houston." He turned, gesturing toward Rex. "Obviously, that was a lie. Someone in the transport chain abandoned him hundreds of miles from home, despite his injury. Despite being alone in unfamiliar territory, Rex not only survived but continued to serve." Harris looked directly at Lily. "He saved a child during a flood, using the exact water rescue techniques he was trained to perform, even without a handler, without direction. He fulfilled his duty." The chamber remained silent as Harris concluded. "I stand before you not just as Rex's former handler, but as someone who knows his true character. The suggestion that he would harm a child isn't just wrong, it's an insult to everything he represents. Rex deserves honor, not condemnation." Mayor Wilson nodded solemnly. "Thank you, Captain Harris. Your testimony is highly relevant to these proceedings." He turned to the council members. "Does anyone have questions for Captain Harris before we deliberate?" Councilwoman Eleanor Bridges, a retired school principal known for her thoughtful approach to civic matters, leaned forward. "Captain Harris, if Rex is officially retired from service, what are your department's intentions regarding his future?" Harris straightened. "Officially, Rex remains property of the Dallas Police Department until formal retirement paperwork is completed. However, given the circumstances of his abandonment, I've been authorized to make decisions regarding his placement." He hesitated, glancing at Frank and the Andersons. "I came here intending to bring him home with me. I've since relocated to a house with a yard, specifically to accommodate him. But I can see he's formed connections here." Rebecca Anderson spoke up. "Captain, we'd be honored to give Rex a home with us. Lily and he have a special bond after what they went through together." Harris nodded thoughtfully. "I believe that might be the best solution. With your permission, I'd like to visit regularly. Perhaps help with his ongoing training and care." Frank Mitchell cleared his throat. "If I might suggest, this doesn't have to be an either-or situation. Rex could divide his time between both homes. Military and police dogs often adapt well to dual-handler situations when properly structured." Before Harris could respond, Margaret Winters rose from her seat, her expression taut with frustration. "This is all very touching, but it doesn't address the fundamental issue. Whether this dog was once a police officer or not, he's been living as a stray for months. He's been seen throughout town, frightening residents. The municipal code is clear about unrestrained animals." Mayor Wilson sighed. "Mrs. Winters raises a procedural point we still need to address. The council must vote on the petition as filed." The chamber tensed as Wilson turned to his fellow council members. "Having heard testimony from both sides, we will now vote on the resolution before us. That the German Shepherd, known as Rex, be classified as a dangerous animal under Municipal Code Section 14.3 and be removed from town limits or humanely euthanized. Councilors, how do you vote?" The vote proceeded quickly and decisively. Councilwoman Bridges voted against the resolution, as did Councilman James Peterson. Councilman Howard Taylor, typically Margaret's strongest ally, hesitated visibly before also voting against the resolution. Only Councilman William Foster supported Margaret's position, leaving Mayor Wilson's vote unnecessary. By a vote of 3-1, the resolution is defeated, Wilson announced, relief evident in his voice. Rex is not classified as dangerous and may remain within town limits, provided he is properly licensed and supervised going forward. A spontaneous burst of applause erupted from many in the chamber. Lily clapped enthusiastically, her face radiant with joy. Even some of Margaret's original supporters seemed relieved by the outcome, the compelling testimony having shifted their perspectives. Margaret Winters sat rigidly in her seat, her expression a study in thwarted certainty. After a moment, she gathered her papers and stood to leave, her supporters trailing behind her in diminished numbers. As the formalities concluded and people began to disperse, Rebecca approached Captain Harris. "We meant what we said about giving Rex a home. Lily would be heartbroken to lose him now." Harris smiled, watching as Lily wheeled herself closer to Rex, who gently nuzzled her outstretched hand. "I can see that. And frankly, I'm just grateful he's alive and with people who recognize his worth." He extended his hand to Rebecca. "Let's work something out that gives Rex the best of both worlds." Frank joined them, leaning on his cane. "I'd be happy to help with the transition. I've got experience with retired working dogs." Harris studied the older man with evident respect. "Marine K-9 unit. Right, I recognized some of your handling techniques earlier." 26 years, Frank confirmed with a small smile. "Never quite leaves you." As the adults discussed logistics, Lily remained focused entirely on Rex, her small fingers gently stroking his ears. "See," she whispered to him, "I told you everything would be okay. You're coming home with us." Rex rested his muzzle lightly on her knee, his dark eyes reflecting a contentment that had been absent for months. The shepherd who had survived abandonment, injury, and months on the streets had finally found what he'd been seeking all along, not just shelter, but purpose, connection, and recognition of his true nature. Outside the town hall, spring sunshine bathed Oak Ridge in golden light, the recent storm's destruction already giving way to new growth and renewal. For Rex, the long, solitary winter was finally over. Whatever the future held, he would face it not as a forgotten hero, but as a cherished member of a family who understood exactly who and what he was, a guardian with the heart of a warrior and the soul of a protector. Frank Mitchell watched the scene with quiet satisfaction, the weight of his concern finally lifting. In Rex's story, he recognized something of his own, the struggle of a warrior to find meaning after service, the journey to rebuild purpose from loss. As he observed the gentle interaction between the battle-worn shepherd and the child he had saved, Frank felt a certainty that transcended words. Some bonds, once formed in moments of truth and courage, were destined to endure beyond all obstacles. Rex was home at last. Folks, what happened in Oak Ridge isn't just a story about a dog. It's about the America we all remember, where character still matters, where service is honored, and where second chances aren't just given, but earned. Rex's journey speaks to something we've all felt, being set aside after years of loyal service, our experience overlooked, our value questioned. How many of us have felt forgotten after dedicating decades to our jobs, our communities, our country? But Rex reminds us that true worth doesn't diminish with age or injury. His story touches that tender spot in our hearts because we've all feared being discarded. Yet we all hope someone will see past our gray hairs and creaky joints to the lifetime of wisdom and loyalty we carry inside. When that small town nearly threw away a hero simply because he no longer fit their idea of useful, it wasn't just Rex they were judging. It was the notion that dedication and sacrifice deserve respect, not disposal. In Rex's vindication, we find our own. Remember, the America we built honors its veterans whether they walk on 2 legs or 4, and recognizes that some of life's greatest heroes aren't found in their prime, but in their perseverance.